Mr. Whitaker, for being here and for being willing to serve. I appreciate our conversation yesterday, and I appreciate you coming in today. One of the things that I worry about, not just at the FAA, but it's sort of the government administration more broadly, is that we focus on sort of bizarre questions of identification and language rather than the very real problems that you guys have to confront, you guys have to address. My colleagues on the Democratic side typically want government to be a little bit maybe bigger or more aggressive than we do on our side. But I think pretty much all of us think that we want an FAA that is good at its job and prevents airlines and airplanes from crashing, one of the most important functions that exists in our government, and I want it done well. So let me just sort of ask that with that sort of setup in mind. I've been a little bit worried about the focus on non-gendered language that exists in some of the FAA manuals and recent trainings. Just to give you an example, the FAA recently hosted a, quote, inclusivity summit where the spokeswoman stated, quote, aerospace is for everyone and the language we use matters. We launched an agency-wide initiative to adopt gender-neutral and inclusive aviation terminology. Now, as an example of some of this, which I struggle not to laugh, the FAA has decided that it should stop using airman, it should start using pilot, and it should stop saying unmanned, it should start saying uncrewed, and I guess generally the word cockpit is offensive, and so should stop being used in the Federal Aviation Administration. And I'm just curious, Mr. Whitaker, you seem like a very serious guy. Do you believe that the FAA should be focused on eliminating all references to gender-specific language like the ones I just mentioned?
Thank you, Senator. I guess I would start by saying that the primary mission at FAA is going to be safety.
Sure.
And that will always be the top priority. I do think language evolves. We went from stewardesses to flight attendants, and it doesn't strike me as necessarily out of the ordinary to do that. But again, my focus is going to be on safety and running the agency effectively.
I understand that, and I understand that language does sometimes evolve. I guess the concern that I have, if I'm looking at this from the perspective of my constituents in the state of Ohio, they see a government agency that has an important function. Instead of focusing on that important function, it's focused on things like changing unmanned to uncrewed. It just seems a little unserious. I think I speak for a lot of people in the state of Ohio when I would say that I just want a lot of our government agencies to be a little bit less weird and a little bit more focused on the mission. And I hope that if you're confirmed, you will take a similar approach. One way in which I think this is a particularly acute problem in the aviation industry, and you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, is traveling by air has become more and more miserable, it seems, over the past couple of years. I mean, it's because airlines are a little bit too unstaffed. It's because of some of the pent-up demand, the latent demand from the COVID era. But one thing that I've become aware of just in the last few months is that apparently travel times between certain major American cities has actually gone up over the last 50 years. We have this sense in America that we're on this pathway to sort of technological progress. It marches on and on and on. But apparently 50 years ago, it took less time to fly from New York to Houston than it does today. That seems kind of weird, right? Like, why in an era of technological progress is it taking us longer to travel from one place to another? That seems to indict the aviation industry or the people who regulate the aviation industry or somebody who's involved in the aviation industry. And so I just encourage you to be focused on as many of the real problems instead of the fake problems. I think it will build trust in your agency if you're able to do that. Let me just ask this final question. I mean, do you think it's fair that we're dealing with a labor shortage in the aviation industry, whether it's flight crews, pilots, or ground staff?
I think there are different causal factors for those situations. I think for pilots, for example, for many decades, it was not a particularly well-paid profession, particularly at the entry level. And it became well-paid at the very end of your career, but you started at a very low salary. So I think we've seen those salaries go up pretty significantly over the past few years. So the market, I think, is working fine. A lot more people are being attracted to that profession. I put that in a different category than the controller shortage, which is really a pipeline issue for hiring at FAA that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I understand. And recognizing my time is low here, I just asked Mr. Whitaker, to the extent possible, I'd ask you to be as focused as much as you can on the actual administration, on the real problems, on the safety challenges, and not on these sort of weird language priorities. Again, I think it erodes confidence in federal agencies. I also think it's a huge distraction. Thank you for being here.